Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be forcing myself to read some of the non-fiction books on my physical TBR. So I've been reading for most of my life now, and I have never liked non-fiction books. I've always been a fiction reader. I used to read a lot of fantasy, which I think kind of contributed to it because I kind of thought that if I'm reading, it might as well be about this cool, fantastical world rather than just some boring thing that happened in our world. Obviously, as I've grown up, I've matured just a smidge and have actually found some really interesting non-fiction books. I also don't think it helped that I thought kind of growing up that non-fiction was just boring textbook that had no like interesting writing style or like a self-help book. So I've definitely discovered more of the genre. Surprisingly, it doesn't just consist of that. And finding books that are on topics I find interesting or are written by authors that do a really great job of telling the story, that even if you're not super interested in the topic, it's told so like in such a beautiful way. And after reading these books, which I was kind of dreading this video, I have really cemented this as a genre I'm really interested in and want to read more of, because when an author puts that much time and effort into all this research, you get to learn about something that actually happened and is really interesting, and there's usually like good life lessons to take from it. But it's also told in such an interesting way that they turn it into a narrative almost, and I don't know, I've just really found that I enjoyed it much more than I expected. So let's get into the books I read. So the first book I read was The House of Gucci by Sarah Gay Forden. This book has been on my TBR, I think, since I was like 9. My mum had this book and she gave it to me, and I've been meaning to read it for ages. I tried to read it a couple of years ago, I think when the movie came out, and hated it. I was like, this is so boring. Tried it again with a audiobook. Got a little bit into that, but I found all the Italian names super confusing. And I actually DNF'd it, and I was like ticked off as one of my DNFs because one of my goals this year is to DNF 10 books. So I was super excited that I had one, but then I picked it up again. So I actually ended up loving this book. I think I gave it 4 stars, maybe 4.5 stars. It is absolutely crazy. If you don't know what it's about Gucci, which is the fashion house, and kind of where it started. Kind of all the way through to about 2000, I think, was when it was published. So we follow the story of the original like founder and his family. It was a family business, how it kind of grew within Italy, and then as it moves down the generations, each new kind of generation takes charge, and we kind of see their vision for it. So they move it to an international corporation. It was a family business, and then we also see it start to get sold, and now it's a publicly traded company, which was like very against what the kind of grandfather, the founder, wanted. And then we see it kind of go through being the height of luxury to being really trashy to kind of the resurgence under Tom Ford. And at the same time, we're also following all the family drama and then the business drama. So there's kind of like 3 different strands. The family was absolutely crazy. They are the most like fictional, non-fiction characters ever. They were like suing each other all the time, and then they go to lunch. Like they were just it would have been a great reality TV show, suing each other for parts of the company because they didn't agree with stuff, all that kind of thing, and then ending up having like generational feuds, which is obviously not great. And then the business, where they basically would just treat it like their personal piggy bank and not really keeping things separate between personal and company expenses, ending up owing millions of dollars to the business, all this kind of stuff. There was this whole like part about their back taxes that one of the like brothers moved to America, decided he didn't want to pay taxes because they didn't really do that at the time in Italy, and he owed like tens of millions of dollars to the IRS and was just like, nah, no problem, I'm not paying that. He was imprisoned at like 70. All of that was really interesting. And then it kind of ends with the like murder that was put out on one of the family members and like the hit that was put out in that trial. So it was absolutely crazy. I didn't know any of this. Is well before my time, so it was really interesting to read about all this. I think most people know like the Gucci name, but not really all that came behind it. And I didn't know that they had kind of pioneered what we now know today as like the luxury corporation and how everything has worked out. So it was interesting. I didn't know there was such like an industry leader there. The only thing I didn't love was that it jumped around so much chronologically, and it makes sense because as you hear, like you're kind of following a lot of different threads, and you kind of have to, you have to organize it somehow. I think I personally would have liked it to be a little bit more chronological, because we would kind of follow something all the way through to like the 90s, and then we'd skip back to the 70s and we're following something else. So I found that a little bit confusing sometimes to keep track of as well, because there's so many family members. I think we ended up following like 20 different family members. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of, do all that. They did have a very helpful like family tree at the beginning, but it's still a little bit difficult. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it like 4 or 4.5 stars. I did ding it because it was a little bit long and it was, yeah, just the jumping around made it a little bit hard to follow sometimes. But I definitely would recommend this if you have any interest in like fashion or Gucci in general, or just want to read an interesting, crazy book. I'd highly recommend it. So the next book I read is The Radium Girls by Kate Moore, and I also love this book. I think I gave this 4.5 or 5 stars. It was so interesting and definitely unexpected for me to love it as much as I did. This book is about the young women who used to paint the radioactive paint onto pocket watches during like the First World War to make them glow in the dark. And to do so, they used to lick the tip of the brush to make it like pointed, and they were then ingesting radium, which obviously is not great as it's a radioactive substance. So it was really interesting to read about that. It's something I had no idea about, and Kate Moore handled the topic with a lot of grace. It was obviously it's quite a heavy, serious topic, but her writing was so interesting. I don't feel like she was kind of writing to fill a page count. A lot of it was like very, very thoroughly researched, and it felt like we were really getting to know the characters and the situation, which I really appreciated. It was crazy the way that it all kind of unfolded, and obviously we know, like as a person now reading this back, I know that I shouldn't be licking radium, but it was really interesting to hear about kind of how much these girls were assured by their supervisors that it was safe, and especially because a lot of these scientists had been around radium and in such small quantities that the powder had. They were like, oh, it's fine, but they were literally ingesting it because they were licking the brushes. A lot of it kind of goes through the scientific kind of side of it and them discovering what was wrong with the girls, the health issues, and then it kind of delves into not necessarily the cover up, but a lot of them being ignored. And, you know, there were cases happening all across America, and they knew about it 10 years before they knew about it in this place, but it was still, they were still fighting the same battle. That was really interesting to read about, and obviously very sad to hear. But then we hear about these wonderful women and their like story of strength and how they kind of band together and fight against these places, trying to get awareness, trying to get compensation for their medical bills as their bodies are literally falling apart. It also has some photos in it of like what happens to the girls and what happens when your bones are exposed to radium. And yeah, it was disturbing. I didn't know what a jawbone would look like when radium had been like delivered to the center of the bone. So it was really interesting kind of seeing those, and I think they really helped, you know, give weight to the situation and kind of, you know, put, what's the word? Like, I want to say a face to a name, but that's not the right way to say that. But you know what I mean? Like being able to see the actual impact was really helpful. It's also a little bit difficult to read at times because you know that, like you and I know that you shouldn't lick radium, but obviously they didn't know, and they were so excited because they were like really kind of viewed really highly in their communities because they worked at the radium painting place, and they'd leave and be like glowing in the dark, and they'd paint it on their faces, and you're just like, oh my god, don't do that. So that was kind of interesting to see. You know, I like reading stuff like that where it's historical and you're kind of sitting there going, oh my god, you shouldn't do that. Like, you know what's going to happen, but obviously they don't. Kind of the point. But I don't know. I enjoy stories like that. I also really appreciated the author's tone of this. It takes quite a sad and kind of serious issue and is a bit snappy and funny with it. I also don't think it was too over the top in pushing kind of what was done to the girls, which I really appreciated. It was still like not overly opinionated. Obviously what happened to them was wrong, but it was nice that it wasn't clouded. I've read some books that you can tell that the author is, it's like they're writing the book to, I don't know, place blame. And I really appreciated that this kind of wasn't like that. It kind of let you draw that conclusion yourself. And because it wasn't shoved down your throat, it kind of allowed us to see more of the full picture. And they were doing this to cut costs, or they were doing this because this person didn't talk to this person that was wrong. It wasn't like this company was evil and they were poisoning these girls for fun. Like, I think some books can kind of get a little bit over the top with blaming people and placing blame, and I really appreciated that this wasn't overly done. It was kind of tastefully done, if that makes sense. I don't know, this review's been very concise, but it was a really brilliantly written book. It was heavily researched, and I think it stays interesting and has enough kind of bite to keep you interested and hooked without making it, you know, over the top, and it's still educational enough. So I would highly, highly recommend it. The last book I read was 102 Minutes by Jim Dwyer. This book is about the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers and kind of the journey that everyone inside went through to get out. So it's a lot of victim accounts and just kind of putting all of the different accounts and information together to kind of tell the story chronologically. This was a 5-star read for me. I found it incredibly interesting, and I think it'll probably be one of my favorite books of the year. The story is just told in such a unique way, I think, because it kind of balances the victims and first responders' accounts with kind of some backstory about the buildings and about what was kind of going on. So we kind of mix between different office workers and what their story was, what they were doing on different floors, which I find really interesting to hear about. You know, Susie that went out for a cigarette and got back at this moment and all that kind of thing. But then we're also hearing about building codes, and we're jumping back to the 70s or the 60s, even before like the towers were built and when they were in their planning stages, and about different building codes that meant that they didn't need the same safety stairs or fireproofing that was never tested, all that kind of stuff. I did see a lot of negative reviews for this book because the author kind of goes on these long tangents, and people almost take it as the author placing blame on like the fire department because they had new walkie-talkies that they weren't using. I didn't really read it like that. I just found it so interesting to learn about all the tiny little moving pieces that contributed to the like catastrophe going as it did. A bit like Radium Girls, I don't think there was like strong finger pointing at all. I think it was handled really well and gracefully for such an important and delicate topic. But I think I really enjoyed learning about what happened like logistically, and how there were all these small issues that people were coming up with, and that this person had seen this but wasn't able to communicate it because there were so many communication issues, or that the building hadn't been tested for the fireproofing that it was claiming, and all this kind of stuff. It's just, you don't even think about that, obviously, because there's a much bigger issue at play. But I really found it to be a kind of in-depth dissection of all the tiny moving pieces, and yeah, I found it really interesting, and I learned a lot from it. And I think the author did a great job kind of collecting all of this research that we have from all the like postmortems that were done on the event itself, because there was obviously a lot of issues with the departments that responded and with buildings. And I think there was so much that came out of that, like that was researched by different commissions. And it was interesting to see that all laid out alongside the first-hand accounts from first responders, 911 operators, and like people who were fleeing the towers. I think it was really kind of molded together in such a beautiful way that it told this story in an interesting way that allows us to learn about kind of the shortcomings and where we need to learn from that, while also telling these incredible stories of bravery and courage and people helping each other and like true humanity. I really love the detail the author went into about different people's stories as well, and that we kind of got to learn their backstory and how they got out or how they helped other people get out and where they are now and all that kind of stuff, and the connections that were formed. And yeah, I don't think I've ever kind of seen a piece of media that really captured the like event as clearly. And I think it was really, really well done. So I would definitely highly recommend this to anybody. It feels a bit wrong to kind of jump into my usual like chipper conclusion after speaking about that last book, but I'm going to be wrapping it up here. That is it for today's video. I read those 3 books. The Gucci book I really enjoyed, but will be unhauling because I don't think I'm going to read it again. And when I say unhauling, I'm just going to give it back to my mum. So it can go back on her shelves and she can decide what to do with it. The second book, which was also from my physical TBR, Radium Girls, I'm going to be unhauling as well. Again, I really enjoyed it, but I don't feel the need to keep it on my shelves, and I'm sure someone else will enjoy it. And then the last book, 102 Minutes, I think I would probably keep this if I had it, but I didn't have it. So this one doesn't need to be unhauled. But yeah, I think 2 books off the physical TBR is pretty good, and they're unhauled, so making good progress. Please let me know in the comments below if you guys have any favorite nonfiction books that you think I should read, because after these, I'm definitely interested in reading more of the genre, and I'd appreciate your recommendations. But yeah, that is it for today's video, and I hope to see you in another one soon. Bye!